Hello everybody, patch 2.6.1 has hit the Diablo 3 PTR, and I had kind of put off reading the patch notes for a while because I was like, it's probably just going to be like some small patch that just changes a couple things and that's it. But little did I know when I actually read the patch notes that it is a massive balance patch by a significant margin. There are so many little changes that are going to affect every single class, to the point where if you are a person who really enjoys playing certain builds that may not necessarily be good at the moment or the best ones, and nobody runs them because they're just, they're not good, but they're the one that you like, then you probably will enjoy this patch quite a bit because it buffs a lot of those classes and their sets and their items in order to make a lot of the different builds more viable across the board, which is great. Because one thing we saw with the Necromancer that was really good was there were a significant amount of builds that were all pretty close to each other as far as pushing greater rifts. And if you weren't concerned with pushing high greater rifts, then almost every single build for the Necromancer was very, very good. It's not something that we've seen since the recent monk changes, where the monk has so many different sets that are just extremely good, and he can run, very different builds from each other, and all of them be viable. Well, now the Necromancer is doing that, and they see that there's success in that. It's hard to do that, by the way. It's hard to balance that kind of thing. And with this patch, with 2.6.1, they're like, let's try to make as many builds as possible in that same vein, where you can run them throughout the season, even if they're not necessarily the best one. They're going to be close enough that they're worth doing. So across the board, a lot of different skills have been changed. A lot of different items have been changed. I'm not going to go into every single one of them. I'm just going to highlight some individual ones that I think are important. For instance, the Crusader Blessed Hammer Limitless Rune has been redesigned. Before, it was like when one of the hammers would hit an enemy, it had a chance to break off and spawn an additional hammer. And it's been redesigned, so now it just increases Blessed Hammer damage by 640% as holy damage still, and increases the area of effect, so the area of the where the hammers go, by 20 yards. So it makes it pretty big, and you're going to be doing a lot of damage to a ton of different enemies with this new rune. The reason they changed it is because having all those extra projectiles made a ton of lag when you were in high density, which is something I experienced when I played the Hammer Den several times, where I'm playing with my friends, I jump into a group of enemies, I'm just like hammer, 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 and they're all out, and then all of a sudden the game starts lagging for everybody, and they all give you that, and you're like, it's not me, it's my build, it's not me, it's my build, I swear, it's my build, I can't do this, it's my build. And they're like, can you run a different build, because this is annoying? Well, I'm glad that they've made it so that Blessed Hammer doesn't have that issue anymore, which is great. A couple other things that got changed. Necromancer had quite a few different skill changes. Command skeletons are now working the way that people said that they probably should work, where when you use command skeletons, it breaks the crowd control effects on them, and they no longer die after taking too many hits. So before that, they would just die after just being hit so many times, and it's like, well, that kind of sucks, because you're trying to build up different damage stuff with your command skeletons, with all the different items that you have, and with them just like randomly dying, it felt kind of bad. So that's been changed. On top of that, Simulacrum has a little, this is a quality of life change. It has a little glow thing on the skill when it's active, where it didn't have that before. So now you kind of know, like, okay, I'm going to be using double my HP here, so I got to be careful. Skeletal Mage has made it so the duration of the one that's about to expire is the one that you see. So if you cast a Skeletal Mage, you'll see whichever one is about to expire soonest as the duration, which means you can kind of better keep them up and running, which is great. My favorite change out of all this is that Bone Armor has its essence cost removed and can now be cast while moving, which is great because many of you know I made this awesome build called the Corpse Party build. In fact, I'm running variations of it in the background footage. And the main crux of it was that you had to kind of use Nemesis Bracers or a certain passive in order to keep your essence up, because the only thing that in this build that cost essence was Bone Armor, and Bone Armor is pretty essential to this. So to have it so essence cost is removed, perfect. It's actually a pretty major buff to my build, and I'm really excited for that because I ran nothing but my Corpse Party build this last season and completed my season within like 2 days. It was great. On top of that, the Fueled by Death passive for Necromancer, which was movement speed bonus when you consume a corpse, can now exceed the cap of 25% movement speed. So now you can get a pretty significant speed farm build going with Fueled by Death, and it's something that I'm running in the build that you're seeing now. It's great. There's just across the board a lot of changes like that. And then we get into the legendary item changes, and this is when things get awesome. Awesome is the only word for it, because there's so many item changes and skill changes across the board that, again, there are going to be things that you didn't think would ever be viable, and they now are. So, you know, for example, let's just throw out there, Skull Grasp has had its damage increase. So it now increases the damage of Whirlwind by 500%, where the max was 300% before. Girdle of Giants is all barbarian stuff. Girdle of Giants, Seismic Slam increases earthquake damage by 250% as opposed to 100%, right? Crusader stuff, Blade of Prophecy. Your 2 condemned enemies also trigger another condemned explosion, and the damage of condemn is increased by 450%. That last bit was never on there before. It was just the double condemn explosion. Now it also increases condemn by 450%. Oh, how about Freighter's Wrath, the shield that goes with that sword? Condemn no longer has a cooldown and costs 40 wrath, was what it said before. But now it also has condemn damage up to 600% on it, which is great. Then you have things like the Gerfalcon's. These 2 items are the hardest to pronounce. Gerfalcon's Foot is the flail, which just removed the resource cost of Blessed Shield. And then Jakenboard, I think is how you pronounce it, is the shield that made it so Blessed Shield then ricochets to 6 additional enemies. Both of these items have a new effect on them. The flail has the increased Blessed Shield damage by 500%, and the shield has increased Blessed Shield damage by 400%. I think you're getting at the crux of all of the changes here. They're just massive damage buffs across the board, which is really, really good. Demon Hunter, Yang's Recurve, multi-shot attacks 50% faster, and its damage is increased by 150%. Last bit obviously was not there before. Manticore reduces the hatred cost of Cluster Arrow by 50%, was 40%, which is good. And, by the way, new item effect increases its damage by 300%. Holy crap, that is good. If you liked running Marauders before with the all of the turrets down, and then you're using Cluster Arrow to kind of burst enemies down, well, now this is even way more viable than before, and it's great. Like, I'm looking forward to that. Monk has had several different changes. Fist of Astarak, Exploding Palm, on death, explosion damage is increased from 300% to 500%, which is great. And on top of that, if you're excited for, you know, running an Exploding Palm build, maybe using the Juliana set, Binding of the Lost, which is the belt, each hit with 7-sided strike grants used to be 3.5% damage reduction for 7 seconds. Now it is 5% damage reduction for 7 seconds, which is great. Remember that you can also double up the amount of hits that 7-sided strike does, so you can get a pretty significant amount of damage reduction from that. Scarbringer, damage from Lashing Tail Kick is increased by 600%, up from 300% to the first 7 enemies hit. That's great. Monk had a really good speed farm build using Scarbringer now. They can just use, you know, essentially the this new one, so that way you're getting even more damage bonus out of it. And then, of course, Necromancer items, Bloodsong Mail. While in Land of the Dead, Command Skeletons does not gain the effect of all runes. They removed that. It doesn't do that anymore. And deals 125% additional damage. But instead, it also gains the effect of Enforcer, Frenzy, Dark Mending, and Frenzy Grasp runes. It's very specific. I don't get that change yet, but I'm sure if I played the build with Command Skeletons, it would probably make a little bit more sense, but I actually didn't touch it at all this last season. Blood-Tide Blade, you remember that terrible Death Nova item? Well, it now deals 100% increased damage for Death Nova for every enemy within 25 yards. That used to be 30% increased damage within 15 yards. Pretty good change. That actually might make Death Nova viable in several builds, but I think it's still a little underwhelming, but it is better, which is good. I think that's necessary. Dainty's Binding, this is a great change. You gain an additional 50% damage reduction when there is an enemy affected by any of your curses, as opposed to just Decrepify. It's great. More of that. It frees up, and we said this since the beta, that frees up a lot of options, and now they've gone and made that change, which is great. We wanted that. Defiler's Curious, your Bone Spirit damage is increased by 500% for every second it is active, up from 100%. I now have a new goal of making a Bone Spirit build viable and be able to push greater rifts, which is going to be awesome. There's a couple other changes here that are really nice, such as the Bone Spear weapon. Bone Spear down costs 40 essence and deals 700% increased damage, up from 450%. Nayer's Black Death, which is an item they nerfed and eviscerated in the beta because it was too overpowered in the beta, but then we saw it never be used once it was nerfed. So it's halved its damage increase per poison skill you're using, up from 65% to 100%. So it's pretty much back to where it was in the beta, which is great because in the beta we only saw people using this item. And then once they nerfed it, nobody ever used it. Now that it is increased, it's still not quite the best item, but it is good enough that you're going to start seeing it in many builds, which is great. I think that's a good change. Scythe of the Cycle secondary skills deal 400% increased additional damage while Bone Armor is active, up from 300%, which is good. There's just a couple other really cool little effects here. Johnstone, which is an item I use in my Corpse Party build. It now grants 50 stacks of Macabre Knowledge. It used to stack infinitely. So it grants 50 stacks of Macabre Knowledge when Land of the Dead expires. So at the end of the Land of the Dead, instead of how many corpses you're using. And then Macabre Knowledge increases the damage of Corpse Lance, Corpse Explosion by 200%. Period. Not necessarily just while outside of Land of the Dead, which is good because if you ever, it was kind of a weird effect if you ever had a channeling pylon or something like that and really high cooldown reduction, you got your Macabre Knowledge and then you would use it again, you would keep stacking, which is great. You would keep getting the stacks before, but now that there's the max stacks, it doesn't really make a difference. But you would never get the bonus out of that because you were still technically within Land of the Dead. So they removed that little last effect there. Witch Doctor has had some changes. Mask of Jerem, Pet Steel, 200% increased damage, up from 100%. That's real good. You know, like I think a lot of people just had a bit of a heart attack there. Short Man's Finger, Gargantuan instead summons 3 smaller Gargantuan, and they have their damage increased by 650%. That's pretty good. But to be fair, the ring just before said each more powerful than before, which didn't really give you a good idea of what it is. Now it makes more sense, and it fixes a couple bugs that were linked to that. Wizard for Ransler's Folly, Energy Twister does 300% more damage and periodically pulls lesser enemies within 30 yards, which is great. Triumvirate, your signature spells increase the damage of Arcane Orb by 400% for 6 seconds, stacking up to 3 times, up from 200%. I think that just gives a pretty good idea of all the stuff going on here. As far as set items, Barbarian, the Immortal King's Call, essentially the damage bonus on the 6th set went from 400% to 750%. Might of the Earth, damage bonus on the 6th set went from 1200% to 3000%. That's a good one. Crusader, Armor of Akan, and there's other changes here. I'm skipping over a lot of stuff just so you know. Like pretty much every set is being affected that wasn't being used for all of the classes. Armor of Akan for Crusader, you deal 900% increased damage, up from 600%, and take 20% less damage while Akarat's Champion is active. Thorns of the Invoker, remember the Thorn set, which was pretty good? Hey, well now attacking with a primary attack increases your Thorns damage by 115% for 2 seconds, up from 35%. That is crazy good. And the 6th set bonus, the attack speed of Punish and Slash are increased by 50% and deal 1600% weapon damage, up from 800% of your Thorns damage to the first enemy hit. That's so good. Demon Hunter, huh? Embroiderment of the Marauder. Remember we spoke about Marauder set just a moment ago? Well, now that 6th set bonus doesn't just increase the damage by 1200%, but 2100% increased damage for each active sentry. Oh, that is good. That is good. Unhallowed Essence got buffed. Didn't necessarily need it. Unhallowed Essence was currently the master build, but I would say Demon Hunters were having a hard time kind of keeping up. So, you know what? That's fine. Your Generators, Multi-Shot, Vengeance deal 70% increased damage, up from 40% for each point of discipline you have. That's a huge buff. It doesn't sound like it, but it is a huge buff. Hey, Monk. Remember Monks? They're pretty cool. Yuliana Stratagem, 4-piece bonus. 7-sided strike now deals not double its total damage with each hit, but 777% total. That's kind of cool. I like that. 6 set bonus increases the damage of your exploding palm by 1800%. Do I need to say more? Like, there are just so many changes across the board for all of this stuff. So what does this mean? I know that was a lot of math, and unless you're reading through the patch notes with me, it didn't really make a lot of sense. So what does all of that mean? It means effectively that we are at a situation with 2.6.1 where we are going to see a massive amount of cool and interesting builds come out of this patch, which is something people were wanting with the Necromancer patch, but instead we just got the Necromancer, which is fine. We got a huge class that is going to completely change the meta, and did, by the way. We'll see, you know, in future that the Necromancer is not necessarily only being run as very specific builds in, you know, different 4-man groups, but is also being changed so that some of their other builds that they were using before are really good. Or, for example, you know, you're seeing a lot of support Necromancers pop up. So like the Necromancer came in and changed the meta of the game, especially in the 4-man groups. Oh, and I actually had forgotten about one change that I wanted to go over while we're talking about Necromancer. Let me find it. It was the Pestilence set. So the Pestilence set, which is a set that not a lot of people use, but is a really cool set, has a new effect on it for the 6 set bonus. It's got the same effect as before, but in addition, Corpse Lance and Corpse Explosion damage is increased by 1500%. And you kind of saw at the beginning, I was running a bit of the Corpse, or the Pestilence Bloody Corpse Party build that I was using. So I think I would just call it the Pestilence Corpse Party build. Worked just fine, which is great. That means 3 of the 4 potential Necromancer sets will work with my one build, which is awesome, because that just means I'm going to keep playing the Necromancer, because that build is a lot of fun. But what I was trying to say there is there's so many different builds out there now that are going to be effective. You're going to play any one of your classes that you enjoy playing. You like the Necromancer, you like the Crusader, you like the Monk, it doesn't matter. You jump on them, and some of their cool sets that they had before weren't used because they weren't good enough. Now you're going to jump on those classes, you're going to grab these different sets, and every time, and this is the cool part, every time you get a new item that you wouldn't normally get excited about before, is now going to be an exciting drop. Because not only is the item going to be worth it now and good, and, you know, actually not necessarily be a trash drop as some items were before, but when you get that item, it's going to change the way you play, because at the beginning of a season, you may not necessarily have all of your optimal stuff, but you may have gotten a set that you wouldn't normally play, and you've gotten some items for that set that you wouldn't normally play, and you're like, you know what? Screw it. Let's play Juliana's this season as a monk instead of playing the Raiment set. And you start getting all the items for that, and you build it up, and you get into higher greater rifts, and you're going to be equal to, if not slightly below, the other builds that were already the top builds. So this is just a good change across the board. This is honestly and seriously very exciting stuff to have this massive balance patch. And I said that it would happen back when the Necromancer was about to release. I said that we're going to get the Necromancer. It's just going to be the Necromancer. Big deal. It is a big deal because, you know, it is a class that's changing the meta. But in a couple months' time, when we get the next patch, it's probably going to be a huge balance patch. Sure enough, that's exactly what we're getting. And that's really, really good. A lot of people were disappointed looking at Gamescom, which is a huge gaming event in Europe, which is basically the E3 of Europe, but a little bit bigger. A lot a bit bigger, let's be honest. As an American, I'm kind of sad about that, but Gamescom is really cool, and I wish I could go one of these days. And when we look at that and we see that there was no Diablo news to come out of Gamescom, but there was news for Heroes, there was news for WoW and Overwatch and even Hearthstone, but no Diablo presence, even though Diablo is there on the show floor and you could play the Necromancer. It was just kind of like, okay, a lot of people were disappointed. They felt like, now we're going back into maintenance mode for Diablo. And then we get a patch like this on the PTR, and it's like, nah, man, they're going ham. They're making massive sweeping changes to these classes to make everything more playable. And I have a theory. My theory, and this is like the perfect way to end this video. My theory is that they're making these massive changes because we're going to get something at BlizzCon. I don't know what it is, but they're trying to lay the groundwork for that. for whatever it is, they're trying to lay the groundwork that all of these classes have many different viable builds. And it's just something fun to aspire to, having all the classes have viable builds and have different sets, not be garbage tier, right? But I have a feeling that we're starting to lay the ground floor for something really cool coming up, and I don't know what it is. We know they're working on a new Diablo game. That goes without question. I don't expect to hear about it at BlizzCon this year. I do expect to hear something about Diablo, and whatever it is, it's going to be pretty cool because the game will be pretty playable from every single class perspective, and that's exciting because let's be honest, Necromancer is cool and all, but having it completely dominate last season was a little disappointing. So let's bring everything else up to the Necromancer level and have it pretty even across the board, huh? Yeah, I'm excited for patch 2.6.1. I didn't think I was going to be, and now I am, because there's some cool changes in there, and I may not just play Necromancer next season. I may also touch my Monk and my Crusader once again. Maybe even dabble in the Marauder set for my Demon Hunter. Either way, let me know what you're thinking about this patch. Some big changes here, some cool changes, some exciting changes, maybe some power creep, probably some power creep, but I am looking forward to it regardless. With that being said, we shall see you guys next time.